Iran launches 10 missiles targeting U.S. bases in Qatar. NATO Secretary General says U.S. strikes on Iran do not constitute a breach of international law. And Israel confirms carrying out airstrikes on the Fordow nuclear site. Iran has launched 10 missiles targeting U.S. bases in Qatar. Reuters, citing diplomatic sources, said the Al-Udeid air base operated by the U.S. in Qatar has been facing an Iranian threat since midday today. Axios reported that Trump is meeting with his national security team to discuss Iranian threats of retaliation over the strikes on nuclear facilities.
الله أكبر.
And NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has said the recent U.S. strikes on Iran do not constitute a breach of international law. Rutte emphasized that the U.S. strikes on Iran do not violate international law. He also reiterated NATO's unified stance on Tehran's nuclear ambitions, stating that allies have long agreed Iran must not develop nuclear weapons.
Having these stockpiles, that we can deter aggression from any threat. Really, let's focus on the essentials here. My biggest fear would be for Iran.
Iran's state television reported that authorities have seized a truck carrying a large number of suicide drones and arrested an agent of the Israeli Mossad west of Tehran. The IRGC's public relations office in Lurstan stated that the detainees had attempted to undermine national unity through their activities in cyberspace. The Israeli occupation army has confirmed that it carried out airstrikes on Fordow nuclear sites in an effort to disrupt access routes to the facility. Earlier, Iranian local officials also stated that Israel had attacked the Fordow nuclear site, according to reports by the Iranian state media. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said that the attacks on symbols of the Iranian regime come in response to every shot fired at Israel's home front. He explained that the targets include the Basij headquarters, a militia often used by the Iranian government to suppress protests, as well as Evin prison, where political prisoners and enemies of the regime are held. The Israeli Minister of Energy announced that 8,000 homes in Ashdod lost power following the Iranian rocket strikes. Israel's Electric Corporation had earlier reported that a strategic facility belonging to the company in southern Israel was hit, noting disruptions in electricity supplies after a rocket landed near the facility in southern Israel. The Wall Street Journal, citing Israeli and Arab sources, reported that Israel is interested in ending the war in Iran soon, taking advantage of the recent U.S. strikes on key nuclear sites in Iran. The paper stated that Israel expects to complete its list of military targets in Iran within the coming days. However, the situation remains volatile and much will depend on Iran's response to the strikes. Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Baghir Ghalibaf has announced that lawmakers are preparing a bill to suspend cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. Iran's parliament is moving to approve legislation that would suspend the country's cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, unless it receives firm assurance of impartial and professional conduct from the UN nuclear watchdog. The IAEA reported in late May that Iran has amassed enough uranium enriched to 60% purity, technically sufficient, if further enriched, for up to 9 nuclear weapons. Iran's defense minister Amir Hatami has declared that every American in Iran has been met with a decisive response, and this time will be no difference. Hatami said such actions are nothing new in Iran's history, citing past conflicts including the 1979 revolution and the Iran-Iraq war. He emphasized Iran's determination to fight for victory, viewing martyrdom as a blessing but focusing on winning the conflict. Iran also stated that the recent U.S. attacks have broadened the scope of legitimate targets for its military, while criticizing President Donald Trump as a gambler for aligning with Israel in the ongoing campaign. The Israeli army announced that it had targeted command centers and assets belonging to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Internet Security Forces in Tehran. In a statement, the army said that under precise guidance from the Intelligence Directorate, warplanes carried out airstrikes on command centers and facilities affiliated with the Internal Security Forces and the Revolutionary Guard Corps in Tehran. And for more analysis, we now move to Hani Saif in our newsroom. To you, Hani.
Thank you, Muna. Ladies and gentlemen, for more analysis, we're joined from Cairo by the Specialist in Israeli Affairs, Ms. Al-Amira Rasha Yusri. Welcome to Q News, Ms. Yusri. Now, how likely is it that the U.S. will respond militarily to these Iranian missile strikes, and what factors might influence their decision?
Thank you so much for having me. First, greet you. Now we have reached the point that we have dreaded for all along, that taking the conflict between Israel and Iran and the intervention of the United States to as it launched airstrikes on nuclear sites into a wider conflict, as Iran now responded by striking military bases of the United States in the Middle East region. Now the conflict is broadening, and now we are seeing new states such as Qatar and Iraq, a huge escalation, which is the Iranian retaliation, which is a turning point in this war. The United States at the moment, with the President Trump, who is the commander of the army, are now examining the next procedures, and there will be a U.S. response and retaliation. Now there is direct confrontation, and we're waiting for a new response from the United States side, because hours ago we were talking about we might actually see a negotiation table once again, and Israel stated implicitly that they have finished the job and they do not want the war anymore. But now ending the war is not a very high potential. This is a huge escalation, and it might lead to further escalation. We cannot guess or speculate what's going to happen, but now we can say that this is a turning point in the course of the war, as Iran directs strikes to the U.S. military bases in the Middle East.
Well, what role do you think diplomatic efforts can still play in de-escalating the tensions between the US and Iran amid these recent developments? You've just mentioned that Israel stated that all the goals and targets have been accomplished, and this might be a good opportunity to go back to the negotiation table.
Let's talk about the Egyptian rule, which is a very significant rule. Egypt has warned the entire world of this escalation and said that we should coordinate to stop this war. There must be diplomatic endeavors at an international level. Egypt is talking now to different parties around the world to stop the war. Egypt is integral and vital for this, with strategic influence and a well-spoken word before the European and the US sides. This stance and this posture can actually be simulated in Europe, as France and European states, as well as Russia, can actually took Iran out of this the huge escalation. Maybe other parties from the European Union might intervene. We wouldn't forget that the Troika, or France and England and Germany, convened last Friday with Iran to stop this war and maybe reach a common ground for a solution. But the US strikes at nuclear sites took us to the 0 point. We were hopeful for the success of the diplomatic efforts of the surrounding states, not to widen the conflict zone and not turning this into a regional conflict, but so far we are seeing more and more escalations, and this is the most probable scenario. We cannot talk about a negotiation table now or talk about peace, even because President Trump is meeting with the military commander to take a decision to respond to Iran and to escalate the situation further. Now we only hope for the entire world to call for an end to this war, not only Egypt, as Egypt now is the only state taking these endeavors to get back to the negotiation table. We need the same response from Russia and the states with the strategic influence to intervene and stop the war and this fast escalation of the situation.
Well, based on your expertise, what do these missile launches indicate about Iran's current military capabilities and the intentions and the arsenal they possess of missiles, that they are actually able to conduct strikes in two different countries simultaneously?
In fact, what I see is very clear. These airstrikes launched by the US or Israel did not undermine Iranian capabilities and did not make it stop launching more missiles. But the question here is the US strike on on Iranian nuclear sites, did it pay its fruits? There are talks that are inside Israel that these strikes did not end the project altogether. It might have caused such losses, but it did not meet its due purposes. Which means that everything done by Israel and the United States did not undermine Iran. And let's speak clearly, Iran is a sovereign major state with a lot of capabilities. It's not a militia for Israel to fight, such as in Yemen or in the Gaza Strip. It is a major sovereign state, and all of this was violated in a grave violation of international law, and that's why Iran responded proportionately to Israel, widening the conflict, and the US intervention actually escalated the situation further, and now we see Iran responding by striking U.S. military base in the Middle East, in Laudaid, in Doha, Qatar, and in Iraq as well. And the meantime, and both strikes were directed simultaneously. In spite of all the U.S. officials' statements that the Udeid base is completely protected with air defenses and it's fully prepared, now it is being struck a few days after targeting the nuclear sites in Iran. This was expected, however, to have this on the ground, to have it as a reality, this is a turning point that might indicate that Iran is also able to deal massive losses to the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Ms. Amira Rasha Yusri from Cairo, the Special Affairs. Thank you very much for joining us here on Q News. Ladies and gentlemen, as we are watching and witnessing the skies of Qatar earlier during the Iranian strikes that were targeting military bases, American military bases in Qatar, as opposed to the live footage at Qatar. Now we see calmness. Right now, however, earlier we see the Qatari skies filled with twinkling missiles that seemed like stars, yet we have not seen any footage of real damage that has been caused by the Iranian strikes. All eyes now are on the Qatari skies. Citizens have panicked as soon as they saw these flying missiles. Not sure exactly where they would land. And for further analysis, we are joined from Cairo by the director of the Strategic Forum for Thought and Dialogue, Mr. Mohammed Abu Shama. Welcome to Q News, sir. Now, Qatar's Ministry of Defense says it is prepared to handle any threat. Now, what capabilities does Qatar have to defend itself against such missile attacks?
First, greetings to you and to the viewers. Undoubtedly, the escalation we're witnessing in the Middle East region with these missile strikes, Iran has not announced full responsibility yet, and eventually the Iranian media indicated that these are Iranian strikes targeting the U.S. interests decisively, and it is the Iranian response to the U.S. airstrikes launched against nuclear sites inside Iran to liquidate the nuclear program. No doubt this was an expected strike, as hours ago Qatar announced closing its airspace, and there were information regarding the Iranian intention to target U.S. interests in the region and carry out such operation. The states hosting U.S. bases are not required to protect itself against these strikes, because the U.S. bases itself have the defense systems. There are 9 military bases for the United States to protect themselves with air defense systems or through air defenses near the shores of these sites. What we have seen before in confrontations between Iran and the United States is not like this escalation. In fact, this time the regional atmosphere that we have seen since the Israeli strikes warns further escalations. Also, Donald Trump policy and the tensions between him and Iran and the intention to escalate since the beginning, and the far-right government in Israel led by Netanyahu, these factors, all of them together, warn further escalation, as we have seen yesterday by the US strikes on Iran, and this will be followed by further escalation, and we will see US response to these Iranian strikes. Iran has announced one way or another that they are going to target US interests around the globe. We
Mr.
are
Abu Shama,
facing...
sir, now you've mentioned that Qatar has cleared its airspace prior to the Iranian strikes, and also there are reports of satellite images of the US bases in Qatar that were cleared of all aircraft. So does that mean that there was some sort of information prior to these Iranian strikes that these strikes would happen? And if there is some sort of information beforehand, what should we expect now? Should we expect an already planned military response or an already planned negotiation meeting?
Regarding prior information, this is not new in this open confrontation between Iran, Israel, and the United States. What we have learned regarding the nuclear sites is that they were already cleared of all personnel. Also, the US bases in Qatar were cleared beforehand, and these are strategic strikes as a response. These are exchange of strikes between two countries in the region, which threatens widening the circle of violence in the region with the existence of armed militias in the regions, including the Houthis and the Hezbollah with military capabilities in Lebanon, also the Shiite in Iraq. What's next after this operation? As I have indicated earlier, I don't think we're going to see any de-escalation soon, because the regional atmosphere and Trump and Netanyahu leading the scenes with their evident tools to take down the Iranian regime and getting rid of the nuclear program are now out there. We are going to see constant operations. What we have seen from the Israeli side, striking also the 3 nuclear sites, and Netanyahu stated that the operations will be ongoing. What we have seen today is only the beginning of the confrontation between Iran and the United States. I don't expect it to stop anytime soon, and the following few days will have more operations that might agitate the region due to this dangerous escalation.
So how can we compare the Iranian strikes on Israeli targets to the Iranian strikes on the bases in Qatar in terms of precision, in terms of the number of missiles, in terms of the intention and the targets and goals needed to be achieved as a result of these strikes?
First, the target and goals. We cannot assess the volume of impact of the airstrikes on the Al Qaeda base. We are still waiting for more information. But soon we will have more details. What we can analyze and discuss at the moment is the impact of these airstrikes on Israel. They have a lot of influence and impact, and the deeper we go with this war and the more prolonged this war is between Israel and Iran, the Iranian side is getting their targets more accurately and precisely. And I think today an electricity facility was targeted and bombed. It's now outrageous to the Israeli public and frightening. We have seen Israeli citizens trying to flee the country. Um, it's now giving panic to the Israeli citizens, and it is ongoing and can be distinguished by precision and accuracy. Israel is diversifying their military goals on Iran, and they are dealing painful strikes to Iran. But the geography of Iran might actually help to deflect some of the goals and targets. Iran is well qualified to receive these goals. Also, Israel has the culture of shelters among Israelis, and they have the ability to pretend the air strikes and the missiles coming, and they can actually go and hide. They have enough time to hide in the shelters, which reduces and minimizes the casualties at the death toll level, but at the infrastructure level, there is a lot of damage being done.
Mm-hmm.
And we see the targets getting more and more strategic, which will prolong the conflict further, in my opinion. And with the United States being involved at the moment, based on the desire of Benjamin Netanyahu to, I think this is now very highly dangerous, as I expect the situation to escalate further.
So if we go with a scenario that all parties go back to the negotiation table, would you say Iran is in a strong position to negotiate after these strikes on the air bases, on the American bases in Qatar and the targets in Israel? Or do you think that they are now at a weaker position after the destruction of the nuclear facilities and infrastructure?
I think now we are far, far away from the negotiation table. What we have seen yesterday and today of escalation does not reflect any possibility of further negotiations. The US and Israeli intentions as well stress that we are going to see more of these operations for a longer period of time for different purposes that are not related to the nuclear program. They are now about taking down and overthrowing the Iranian regime, also undermining and weakening Iran. If we are optimistic about a negotiation possibilities, as you have indicated, Iran will be in. I think this is very relative and will be directly linked to what actually happened to the nuclear reactors inside Iran. Was Iran really successful to transfer the enriched uranium or not? We don't know yet if Iran has the capabilities to re-establish its nuclear program. And this will define the Iranian capabilities to negotiate further and to have a stronger position, as they will be able to actually intercept the U.S. and Israeli strikes and be a threat to the U.S. interests in the region. This will give it an edge in the negotiations, and in both scenarios, what the United States will do during the upcoming few moments will lead us to understand the scenario or what is going to happen, because the Iran actually was obligated to respond to the United States, and this is what we have seen on the air base. I think the United States response will define the course of action in the future.
So now, if you are ruling out diplomatic efforts and negotiation talks, do you expect military escalation? And if we are expecting, or if you're expecting military escalation, would you say that other parties might be involved apart from Iran, the US, and maybe Israel as well?
Everything now says that we will be seeing ongoing operations. Now we have seen Israeli officials, the defense minister and the prime minister, saying that the military operations will be ongoing, and they do not set a time frame for the military operations against Iran, same as Gaza operations.
Yes, but do you expect other parties or countries to be involved in the military escalation?
We might actually see some operations waged by armed militias such as the Houthis. In the coming few hours, they still have the capabilities. We might be surprised by Hezbollah. And there is also the Iraqi militia that might actually wage some strikes. But we are now seeing chaos in the entire regions, and we cannot expect where the strikes will come from.
Mr. Mohammed Abu Shama, I'll have to cut you off because we have a lot more to cover as well. Mr. Mohammed Abu Shama, thank you very much, sir. He was from Cairo, the director of the Strategic Forum for Thought and Dialogue. Thank you for joining us here on Q News. Ladies and gentlemen, now I hand you over back to Mona in our studio. Mona.
All right, thank you so much, Hani, for the analysis on the latest developments, and I guess that brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here is what we've been covering. Iran launched 10 missiles targeting US bases in Qatar. NATO Secretary General says US strikes on Iran do not constitute a breach of international law. Israel confirms carrying out air strikes on the Fordow nuclear site. Well, that concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Q News EGY to stay informed. Many thanks for watching, and goodbye.